The church stood silent, sunlight streaming through ancient stained glass windows, casting pools of crimson and gold across the stone floor. 100 guests held their breath as the vicar's voice echoed through the chapel. If any person can show just cause why these two may not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace. The pause stretched. Then, stop! The single word cracked through the chapel like a musket shot. Every head turned toward the Duke of Ashbourne, standing rigid in the front pew, his hands white-knuckled against the wood. For 3 weeks, he had told himself this was right. For 3 weeks, he had convinced himself that duty meant sacrifice, that honor required watching the woman No, he couldn't let this happen. "Stop this wedding," he said again, his voice raw with something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. "Stop it now." But to understand how the most powerful duke in England came to disrupt his own brother's wedding to the woman he'd ordered his brother to marry, we must go back 3 months to the day Lady Isabella Hartley arrived at Ashbourne Manor, London, spring 1817. Adrian Blackwood, the Duke of Ashbourne, had ruled his dukedom for 7 years with the same iron control he brought to every aspect of his life. At 31, he commanded respect and fear in equal measure, a tall, dark-haired man with piercing grey eyes that missed nothing and a jaw that might have been carved from granite. He was brilliant, they said. Cold, they whispered. What they didn't know was that Adrian's coldness was armor, forged in the fires of responsibility thrust upon him too young when his father died and left him a dukedom drowning in debt and scandal. He had saved the Ashbourne estates through ruthless intelligence and unwavering discipline, denying himself every pleasure, every softness, every moment of weakness. Love was a luxury he could not afford. Marriage was a business arrangement he would eventually be forced to make. His younger brother, Thomas, was everything Adrian was not. At 27, Thomas possessed an easy charm, warm laughter, and the freedom that came from being a second son. He painted, wrote poetry, attended balls for pleasure rather than duty, and generally lived the life Adrian had sacrificed to preserve their family's honor. Adrian told himself he didn't resent Thomas for it. Most days he even believed it. "You need to marry," Thomas said one afternoon in Adrian's study, where papers and ledgers covered every surface. "The title requires an heir. You require an heir. How long will you punish yourself with loneliness?" "I'm not lonely," Adrian replied without looking up from the estate accounts. "I'm occupied." "You're miserable." "I'm responsible. There's a difference." Thomas sighed, abandoning the argument they'd had 12 times. "Fine. Then at least attend Lady Pemberton's ball tonight. Show society you haven't completely forgotten how to smile." "I have work." "You always have work, Adrian. When was the last time you did something simply because you wanted to, because it brought you joy?" Adrian's pen paused above the ledger. He couldn't remember. "The ball," Thomas pressed. 2 hours. Consider it a ducal obligation, if that makes it easier to bear." Which was how Adrian found himself that evening, standing at the edge of Lady Pemberton's glittering ballroom, champagne in hand, watching London's elite swirl past in a kaleidoscope of silk and jewels, feeling like an imposter in his own skin. And then he saw her. Lady Isabella Hartley stood near the terrace doors, laughing at something her companion said. She wasn't the most beautiful woman in the room. There were diamonds who sparkled brighter, roses who bloomed more boldly, but there was something about her that made Adrian's breath catch. Warmth. That was it. She radiated warmth the way others radiated beauty or status. Her amber-brown hair caught the candlelight, her hazel eyes crinkled with genuine mirth, and her smile, God, her smile was like sunshine breaking through London fog. "Lady Isabella Hartley," Thomas supplied, appearing at Adrian's elbow and following his gaze. "Daughter of the Earl of Westfield. Recently returned from 3 years in Italy with her mother. They say she's quite accomplished, speaks 4 languages, paints beautifully, and has a gift for music. And before you ask, yes, she's being courted by half the eligible gentlemen in London." "I wasn't asking," Adrian said, tearing his gaze away. But he was lying. For the first time in 7 years, Adrian felt something other than duty and determination. He felt longing. He ruthlessly crushed it. That night, after Adrian returned to his townhouse, he made a decision with the same cold logic he applied to every business dealing. The Duke of Ashbourne needed to marry. He needed an heir, and since he would never allow himself the weakness of emotional attachment, he would choose a bride based purely on practical considerations. Lady Isabella Hartley was clearly unsuitable. She made him feel things. That alone disqualified her. But his brother Thomas, who was warm and open and capable of love, Thomas could marry for affection. Thomas should marry someone like Lady Isabella. It was perfect, neat, logical. Adrian ignored the ache in his chest and told himself he was being wise. The next morning, Adrian summoned Thomas to his study. "I need you to do something for me," Adrian said, his tone brooking no argument. "I need you to court Lady Isabella Hartley." Thomas stared at him. "I'm sorry, did you just order me to court someone?" "Not in order. Request, strongly." "Adrian." "What?" "The Ashbourne line needs to be secured," Adrian continued, his voice flat, emotionless, the way it always was when he was forcing himself past something painful. "You're of marriageable age. Lady Isabella is well-bred, accomplished, and from everything I've observed, she would make an excellent addition to our family. I want you to pursue her." "You want me to?" Thomas broke off, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You saw her last night, at the ball, and now you're pushing her toward me." "I'm being practical." "You're being a coward." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I'm being a duke. There's a difference. I don't have the luxury of marrying for affection, Thomas. I need someone suitable, someone I can respect, without," he paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much, "without complication. You, however, can marry someone like Lady Isabella, someone warm and vibrant, someone who deserves better than a cold marriage of convenience. And if I refuse, you won't." Adrian's voice was steel now. "Because you know I'm right, because you understand duty, even if you don't live it the way I do. Court her, Thomas. Marry her. Give her the life she deserves." "The life I cannot give her," Adrian didn't say, but the words hung between them anyway. Thomas studied his brother for a long moment, seeing past the cold exterior to the pain beneath. "You care for her. Already, after one glimpse across a ballroom, you care for her." "I don't know her." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Will you do this or not?" Thomas sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing when Adrian had made up his mind. "If it's truly what you want, I'll court her. But Adrian, that will be all." Thomas left, and Adrian returned to his papers, telling himself he'd made the right choice. He told himself that for 3 weeks. Thomas, true to his word, began courting Isabella. He called at the Westfield townhouse with flowers. He escorted her to exhibitions and concerts. He partnered her at balls and engaged her in conversation about art and poetry. And Adrian watched from a distance, torturing himself with glimpses of what he'd voluntarily surrendered. He saw Isabella laugh at something Thomas said at the Marlborough ball and felt something crack inside his chest. He overheard her discussing Venetian architecture with Thomas at a gallery showing, her eyes bright with enthusiasm, and had to leave the room before he did something foolish. He attended a dinner where Isabella sat beside Thomas, her hand occasionally brushing his arm in easy affection, and Adrian drank 3 glasses of wine more than usual just to numb the ache. "You're torturing yourself," his mother, the Dowager Duchess, observed one afternoon when she found him brooding in the library. "If you care for the girl, why, in heaven's name, did you push her toward Thomas?" "I don't care for her," Adrian said automatically. "I barely know her." "You're lying. To me, perhaps, but definitely to yourself." His mother settled into a chair, her sharp eyes seeing far too much. "I've watched you these past weeks, Adrian. You look at Lady Isabella the way your father looked at me, as though she's sunlight, and you've been living in darkness so long you've forgotten warmth exists." "Mother, no, listen. I know what you've sacrificed for this family. I know you believe you must be cold and controlled and untouchable to be a good duke. But my darling boy, you're wrong. Your father was a wonderful duke, and he loved me with his whole heart. The two are not mutually exclusive. Father wasn't rebuilding from scandal and debt. He had his own challenges. Every duke does. The question is whether you'll face them alone, or whether you'll allow someone to stand beside you." She rose, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Thomas is a good man. He'll be kind to Isabella, but he'll never love her the way you already do, and she'll never light his world the way she lights yours. This arrangement you've created, it's fair to no one, not to Isabella, not to Thomas, and certainly not to you. It's done, Adrian said, his voice hollow. The courtship is progressing well. Thomas will propose soon, and Isabella will accept. She'd be a fool not to. And what will you do when that happens? What I always do. My duty. But that night, alone in his study with a bottle of brandy, Adrian finally admitted the truth to himself. He loved Isabella Hartley. He loved her laugh, her intelligence, her warmth. He loved the way she gestured with her hands when she was excited, the way she tilted her head when she was listening intently, the way she treated servants with the same courtesy she showed peers. He loved her, and he'd given her to his brother, and there was no honorable way to take it back. The turning point. 3 days before the proposal. It happened at Ashbourne Manor. Thomas had invited Isabella to spend a week at the family estate, chaperoned by her mother and the Dowager Duchess. It was a clear signal of serious intent, the final step before a proposal. Adrian had planned to stay in London. He'd made excuses, invented urgent business, anything to avoid watching Thomas and Isabella together in his own home. But his mother had been insistent, and dukes did not avoid their own estates out of emotional cowardice. So Adrian found himself returning to Ashbourne Manor, steeling himself for 7 days of exquisite torture. The first 2 days, he was successful in avoiding Isabella. He rode out early to inspect tenant farms, locked himself in his study with correspondence, and pleaded a headache to avoid dinner. Thomas noticed. "You're being ridiculous," he said, cornering Adrian in the library on the 3rd morning. "She's asking about you, wondering if she's offended you somehow. Why would she be offended? Because the Duke of Ashbourne, who is famously meticulous about courtesy, has barely acknowledged her presence in his own home. She thinks you disapprove of her." Something cold settled in Adrian's stomach. "I don't disapprove." "Then act like it. Come riding with us this morning. Be civil. Smile, for God's sake. You're supposed to be her future brother-in-law, not her executioner." Adrian couldn't refuse without revealing why he wanted to refuse, which was how he found himself an hour later, mounted on his stallion, watching Isabella handle her mare with easy confidence as they rode through Ashbourne's parkland. She wore a riding habit of deep green that brought out the gold in her hair, and she rode like she'd been born to it, confident but not reckless, clearly delighting in the speed and freedom. "Your estate is magnificent, Your Grace," Isabella said, bringing her mare alongside Adrian's stallion as Thomas dropped back to speak with the groom. "I've never seen lands managed so beautifully. The tenants we passed their cottages were well maintained. The children looked healthy and educated. That's rare." "You've visited many estates?" Adrian asked, surprised by her observation. Most young ladies commented on the landscape's beauty, not the quality of tenant housing. "Some. And I've read extensively about land management and agricultural reform. My father believes women shouldn't concern themselves with such matters, but I think that's foolish. How can we understand the world if we only attend balls and embroider?" Adrian felt something loosen in his chest. "You read about agricultural reform?" "I read about everything," Isabella said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "History, philosophy, political economy. I'm particularly interested in the Scottish model of tenant farming, the long leases and profit-sharing arrangements. I think it could revolutionize English agriculture if more landowners would consider it." For the first time in 3 days, Adrian smiled. A real smile. "I've been implementing exactly that system on Ashbourne lands for the past 2 years, he said. "The improvement in both productivity and tenant welfare has been remarkable." Isabella's face lit up. "Truly? Oh, I would love to hear about it, the challenges, the results, how you convinced traditional tenants to accept such changes. Could we? Would you mind terribly if I asked you questions? I know it's not proper dinner conversation, but I find I'm endlessly curious about practical applications of theory." And just like that, Adrian was lost. They rode for another hour, and Adrian found himself talking more than he had in months, about drainage systems and crop rotation, about the new school he'd built for tenant children, about his vision for sustainable estate management that prioritized people over pure profit. Isabella listened with complete attention, asking intelligent questions, offering observations that showed genuine understanding. She didn't flutter her eyelashes or change the subject to something more feminine. She engaged, challenged, and contributed. She was extraordinary. Thomas, riding behind them, watched with a sinking feeling in his stomach. That evening, at dinner, Adrian tried to return to his usual cool distance, But Isabella had other ideas. "Your Grace," she said during the fish course, "I've been thinking about what you said this morning regarding mechanization versus manual labor on farms. Have you read Mr. Cobbett's essays on rural poverty?" Adrian had. They spent the next 20 minutes in spirited debate about agricultural policy, while the other dinner guests looked on with varying degrees of amusement and bemusement. The Dowager Duchess was smiling. Thomas was not. After dinner, when the ladies had withdrawn and the gentlemen remained for port, Thomas cornered Adrian in the hallway. "What are you doing?" Thomas demanded, his usual easy nature strained. "I don't know what you mean." "You're courting her. Right in front of me, you're courting Isabella." "I was having a conversation." "You were flirting with agricultural policy, Adrian. You were lighting up in a way I've never seen you light up." And she, Thomas broke off, running a hand through his hair. "She looks at you like you hung the moon. When you talk," she leans forward. "When you smile, which you apparently can do around her," she glows. "And I'm just there, a pleasant companion who doesn't challenge her or interest her the way you do." "Thomas, I didn't intend." "I know you didn't. That's what makes this worse. You pushed her toward me because you're too stubborn to admit you want her for yourself. And now she's falling for you anyway, and I'm playing the fool in a courtship that should have been yours from the start." Adrian felt guilt and longing war in his chest. "I'm sorry. I'll distance myself. No," Thomas said quietly. "No, you won't, because that would hurt her. And despite everything, I care about Isabella enough not to want her hurt." He met Adrian's eyes steadily. "I'm going to propose to her tomorrow, as planned, and she'll probably say yes, because she's practical and kind, and I'm a good match. But Adrian, you need to decide if you can live with that, if you can stand by and watch her become my wife when she should be yours. I gave you my word. I told you to court her, and I'm releasing you from that idiotic command. Court her yourself, before it's too late." Thomas walked away, leaving Adrian alone in the darkening hallway, his careful control finally beginning to crumble. The garden. Adrian didn't sleep that night. At dawn, he went walking in the gardens, trying to think, to plan, to find some way to be rational about a situation that had nothing to do with reason. He found Isabella there. She sat on a stone bench beneath a rose arbor, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. She wore a simple morning dress, her hair loosely pinned, and she looked so beautiful it hurt. "Your Grace," she said, startled, starting to rise. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding. This is your home. Or it will be." The words tasted like ash. Isabella sank back onto the bench, studying him with those intelligent hazel eyes. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you avoid me?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. "I don't. Please don't lie. You've been avoiding me since I arrived, except yesterday, when we rode together. For one wonderful afternoon, you spoke to me as though I was someone worth knowing. Then at dinner, we debated and laughed, and I thought—" She broke off, color rising in her cheeks. "I thought perhaps we might become friends. But now you're back to looking at me as though my presence pains you. So I'm asking directly, have I offended you somehow? Do you disapprove of my match with your brother?" "No," the word came out hoarse. "No, you haven't offended me, and I don't disapprove." "Then what?" Adrian should have walked away, should have maintained the careful distance he'd tried so hard to create, but he was tired, so desperately tired of lying, of controlling, of denying every honest feeling he possessed. "I avoid you," he said slowly, "because being near you is torture, because every moment I spend in your company, I'm reminded that I gave you away, that I pushed you toward my brother when I should have." He stopped, realizing he'd said too much. Isabella's breath caught. "When you should have what?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." She stood, moving closer, her eyes searching his face. "Adrian, your Grace, please. If there's something you need to say." "I shouldn't have pushed you toward Thomas," Adrian said, the confession tearing out of him. "I did it because I thought I was being noble. Because I told myself you deserved someone warm and open, someone who could love you the way you deserve to be loved. Someone who wasn't cold and controlled and—" "Stop." Isabella's hand touched his arm, the contact sending electricity through him. "You're not cold. Controlled, yes, but not cold. Yesterday, when you talked about your tenants, about the school you built, about your vision for Ashbourne. Your eyes lit up. Your whole face transformed. That's not coldness, your grace. That's passion you've learned to hide. Isabella, why did you really push me toward Thomas? Adrian closed his eyes, surrendering. Because I saw you at the ball. Because one glimpse of your smile made me feel things I'd spent 7 years avoiding. Because you terrified me, and I didn't have the courage to court you myself. So I took the coward's path and convinced myself I was being noble. When he opened his eyes, Isabella was staring at him, her expression a mixture of shock and something that looked like hope. You care for me, she whispered. Yes, but you thought you believed you couldn't. I believed I was doing the right thing. I was wrong. For a long moment, they stood in the sunrise garden, the truth finally spoken, hanging between them like morning mist. Thomas is going to propose today, Isabella said quietly. He told me yesterday. He'll take me on a picnic to the lake, and he'll offer me his hand, and I'll say yes, because it's a good match, because he's kind, because refusing would be foolish. Each word was a knife in Adrian's chest. But I need you to know something first, Isabella continued, her voice stronger now. When I came to Ashbourne Manor, I was prepared to accept Thomas. He's wonderful, charming and warm and easy to be with. But yesterday, when we rode together, when you talked to me about things that mattered to you, when you debated with me as an equal, she paused, meeting his eyes, I saw the man beneath the Duke. And that man, Adrian Blackwood, that man I could love, do love, if I'm being honest. Adrian felt the earth shift beneath his feet. You love me. I barely know you. It's ridiculous and impractical and probably foolish. But yes, I love the glimpse I've seen of you, the passion you hide, the kindness you deny, the intelligence you wield like a sword. I love the man who built schools for tenant children and debates agricultural policy with genuine joy. That man is worth loving, Isabella. Her name was a prayer and a plea. But I can't wait for you to overcome your own barriers, she said, and there was grief in her voice now. I can't build a life on hoping you'll eventually let me in. So when Thomas proposes today, I'll accept. Unless, she stopped, waiting. Unless what? Adrian's heart was pounding. Unless you give me a reason not to. Unless you ask me yourself. Unless you're brave enough to choose what you want, instead of what you think you should want. It was a challenge, an ultimatum. A lifeline. Adrian thought of his carefully constructed walls, his 7 years of rigid control, his belief that feeling deeply was weakness and love was luxury, and he thought of Isabella, brilliant, brave Isabella, offering him a choice. I don't know how to be what you need, he admitted, his voice raw. I've spent so long being the Duke that I've forgotten how to be just a man. I can't promise poetry or grand romantic gestures. I'm not like Thomas. I don't want Thomas. I want you, the real you, Adrian, not the perfect Duke, but the imperfect man who cares more than he'll admit and feels more than he'll show. Adrian stepped closer, allowing himself for the first time to truly look at her without armor or distance, to see the woman who had somehow seen through his defenses to the person beneath. If I asked you to marry me, he said slowly, it wouldn't be because it's practical or suitable. It would be because you're the first person in 7 years to make me feel alive. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I was before duty consumed me. Because I love you, Isabella, and I'm finally brave enough to admit it. Tears shone in Isabella's eyes. Then ask me, Isabella Hartley, will you? Wait. She held up a hand, stopping him. Before you ask, there's something you should know. Thomas is walking this way, and my mother and yours are watching from the morning room window. Whatever happens next will be witnessed. Adrian glanced toward the house. She was right. Thomas was indeed approaching, and both mothers were visible in the window above. I don't care, Adrian said, surprised by the truth of it. Let them watch. Let all of London watch. I've hidden enough. He took Isabella's hand in his, and loud enough for Thomas to hear as he approached, Adrian said, Isabella Hartley, I have been a fool. I have wasted 3 weeks pushing you toward my brother when I should have been courting you myself. I told myself I was being noble, but I was being a coward. You deserve better than cowardice. You deserve honesty. He paused, then continued with all the emotion he'd spent 7 years suppressing. I love you. I love your intelligence and your warmth, and your refusal to accept the world as it is when it could be better. I love that you challenge me and see me, and refuse to let me hide behind duty. Will you marry me? Not because it's practical, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Isabella's smile was like the sun rising. "Yes, yes, Adrian, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, there in the garden with the morning light golden around them, and it was clumsy and perfect, and nothing like the controlled man he'd forced himself to be. When they broke apart, Thomas stood a few feet away, shaking his head with a rueful smile. "About time, brother," Thomas said. "About bloody time." But happiness, as Isabella would learn, was fragile in the face of duty. The engagement was announced. London society buzzed with shock, the cold Duke of Ashbourne marrying the woman his brother had been courting. Scandal. Adrian didn't care. For 2 weeks, he was happy. Genuinely, unguardedly happy. He courted Isabella properly. Long walks where they talked about everything, dinners where he made her laugh, moments stolen in libraries and gardens where he kissed her until they were both breathless. "I didn't know you could be like this," Isabella said one afternoon as they sat together in Ashbourne's library, her head resting on his shoulder. Happy, open. "I didn't either," Adrian admitted. "You've awakened something I thought I'd buried forever." But duty never sleeps for long. The crisis came on a grey Tuesday morning when Adrian's solicitor arrived at the London townhouse with devastating news. "Your Grace, we have a problem, a significant problem." Adrian looked up from his correspondence, noting the man's pale face. "What kind of problem?" "Legal. There's a challenge to your father's will. A distant cousin, Mr. Gerald Hartwick, is claiming that your father was not of sound mind when he revised his will before his death. If the challenge succeeds, the entire estate could be thrown into question. The title would remain yours, but the lands, the funds, everything could be tied up in Chancery Court for years." "On what grounds?" "He claims your father was influenced by grief after your mother's first serious illness, that he made rash decisions about the estate that unfairly disadvantaged other family members. It's a weak claim, but Hartwick has secured backing from Lord Chelmsford, and you know how the courts can be swayed by powerful interests." Adrian felt ice settle in his stomach. "What do you recommend?" The solicitor hesitated. "There is a way to make this challenge evaporate. Lord Chelmsford has a daughter, Lady Vivian. She's been seeking a titled match for years. If you were to—" "No." Adrian's voice was steel. "Your Grace, please listen. Chelmsford indicated he would withdraw his support for Hartwick's claim if you showed interest in Lady Vivian. He's not demanding marriage, just, 'I'm engaged to Isabella.' I understand. But if this case proceeds to Chancery, the legal costs alone could bankrupt the estate. Everything you've rebuilt over 7 years could be destroyed. Your tenants, the staff, your brother's future, all of it depends on maintaining the estate's liquidity. One courtship, your Grace. Just enough to satisfy Chelmsford's pride. Then once the challenge is withdrawn, you could break it off and marry Lady Isabella as planned." "Absolutely not. I won't betray her that way." But even as Adrian said it, doubt crept in. He'd spent 7 years sacrificing everything for Ashbourne. Could he truly risk it all now? Could he watch his tenants suffer, his servants turned out, his brother's inheritance destroyed, all for his own happiness? The solicitor left, but the poison was planted. That evening, Adrian found himself in his study, staring at account books without seeing them, the weight of duty crushing him once again. Thomas found him there. "What's wrong?" Adrian explained, watching his brother's face grow grim. "You're not actually considering this," Thomas said. "Tell me you're not considering sacrificing Isabella to appease that pompous ass Chelmsford." "I'm considering the welfare of 300 tenant families," Adrian said flatly. "I'm considering the staff who depend on Ashbourne for their livelihoods. I'm considering your future, Thomas. If the estate is tied up in Chancery for years, I don't care about my inheritance. I care about you being happy for once in your God-forsaken life. Happiness is a luxury. If you finish that sentence, I will hit you," Thomas said furiously. "You've been saying that for 7 years. Happiness is a luxury I cannot afford. Duty comes first. Sacrifice is noble." "Well, I'm sick of it, Adrian. You're not being noble. You're being a martyr. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You're looking for an excuse to push Isabella away because being happy terrifies you more than being cold ever did. You're so used to suffering that joy feels wrong. Well, let me tell you something. Brother Isabella deserves better than a man who will sacrifice her every time duty calls." Thomas stormed out, leaving Adrian alone with his guilt and his duty, and his growing certainty that he was about to make the worst mistake of his life. The breaking. Adrian made his decision with the same cold logic he'd used for every other sacrifice. He would court Lady Vivian, just enough to satisfy Chelmsford, just long enough to make the legal challenge go away. Then he would return to Isabella and explain. She would understand. She had to understand. He was doing this for Ashbourne, for their future, he was lying to himself. But he did it anyway. The next morning, he called on Isabella. She knew immediately that something was wrong. "Adrian, what happened?" he told her. About the legal challenge, about Chelmsford, about what his solicitor had recommended. "So you see," he finished, his voice carefully controlled, "I need to delay our wedding, just for a few months, while this matter is resolved. I'll need to show interest in Lady Vivian, but it won't mean anything. It's purely strategic." "Stop." Isabella's voice was ice. "Stop talking." She stood very still, her hands clenched at her sides. When she finally spoke, her voice shook with controlled fury. "You're telling me that 3 weeks after proposing, 3 weeks after I gave you my heart, my trust, my future, you're going to court another woman to preserve your estate? It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Adrian, do you hear yourself? You're choosing duty over me. Again. Just like you pushed me toward Thomas because duty seemed safer than love. This is different. This is about 300 families who depend on... This is about you being too afraid to fight for what you want." Isabella's composure cracked. "Do you know what I realized, Adrian? You said you loved me. You said I awakened something in you. But the moment duty called, the moment of sacrifice seemed noble. You couldn't surrender me fast enough. That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" Tears streamed down her face now. "I opened my heart to you. I saw past your walls to the man beneath, and I loved that man. But that man isn't real, is he? He's just someone you pretend to be when being cold becomes inconvenient." "Isabella, please. I thought you'd changed. I thought you'd finally chosen to live instead of merely existing. But you haven't changed at all. You're still the man who sacrifices everything for duty, who believes happiness is weakness, who will always, always choose nobility over joy." She pulled off the engagement ring he'd given her, his grandmother's ring, the one he'd placed on her finger with such hope, and set it on the table between them. "I won't marry a man who only loves me when it's convenient," she said, her voice breaking. "I won't spend my life wondering when the next crisis will make you push me away. I deserve better than that. I deserve someone who fights for me, not someone who sacrifices me." "Don't do this," Adrian said, and there was raw pain in his voice now, the control finally shattering. "Isabella, please, I'm trying to protect. You're trying to protect yourself from having to choose between duty and love. Well, let me make it easy for you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't have to choose. I'm choosing for us both. I'm ending this. No, Isabella, no. Goodbye, Adrian." She walked toward the door, then paused without turning. "I hope Ashbourne is worth it. I hope duty keeps you warm at night, because that's all you'll have." She left. Adrian stood alone in the drawing room, the engagement ring glittering on the table like an accusation, and for the first time in 7 years, the Duke of Ashbourne broke. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, and wept. What followed were 3 weeks of hell. Adrian went through the motions of courting Lady Vivian. He called at the Chelmsford residence. He escorted her to the opera. He danced with her at balls, and every moment was agony. Lady Vivian was perfectly pleasant. She was also vapid, self-absorbed, and cared more about his title than the man wearing it. Their conversations were torture. She had opinions on fashion and gossip and nothing else. Chelmsford was satisfied. The legal challenge was quietly withdrawn. Adrian had achieved his goal. He'd never been more miserable in his life. Isabella wouldn't see him. He sent letters, she returned them unopened. He called, she refused him. He tried approaching her at social functions, she left the moment he appeared. London society was having a field day. "The Duke's heart is broken," they whispered. "He chose wrong." Adrian's mother was less subtle. "You're an idiot," she told him bluntly one afternoon. "You had everything, and you threw it away because you're so terrified of happiness you'd rather suffer nobly than risk being vulnerable. I was protecting the estate. You were protecting yourself, from feeling, from risking, from actually living. Adrian, when will you understand? Your father would be ashamed of what you've become, not because you're a bad duke, you're excellent at that, but because you've forgotten how to be human." Thomas wasn't speaking to him at all. The worst part was seeing Isabella from a distance at social functions. She attended balls, spoke with friends, smiled and laughed, but her eyes were dead. The warmth that had first captivated Adrian was gone, replaced by polite emptiness. He'd destroyed her, and himself. And for what? For duty, for noble sacrifice, for the cold comfort of knowing he'd done the right thing. It was hollow. All of it was hollow. The revelation, the breaking point came 3 weeks after Isabella had ended their engagement. Adrian attended Lady Pemberton's ball, ostensibly as Lord Chelmsford's guest. Lady Vivian hung on his arm, chattering about her gown. The legal matter was resolved. Adrian could break off with Vivian now, start trying to win Isabella back. Then he saw them, Thomas and Isabella, standing together near the terrace doors, deep in conversation. Adrian's blood turned to ice as he watched Thomas lean close to say something that made Isabella laugh. Actually laugh. The first real joy Adrian had seen from her in weeks. "Excuse me," Adrian said to Lady Vivian, not caring that he was being rude, and crossed the ballroom. He arrived just in time to hear Thomas say, "Marry me, Isabella. I know my brother is an idiot. I know he hurt you, but I've loved you since the moment we met. Let me give you the life you deserve." Time stopped. Isabella stared at Thomas, surprise and confusion warring on her face, and Adrian felt something break open inside him, not the controlled crack of 3 weeks ago, but a complete shattering, because he understood with sudden, blinding clarity what he'd been doing. For 7 years, he'd told himself that sacrifice was noble, that duty came first, that his own happiness didn't matter as long as he served Ashbourne well. But it was all lies. He wasn't being noble, he was being a coward. He was so afraid of feeling, of needing, of loving someone enough to be destroyed by their loss, that he'd turned duty into armor and sacrifice into an excuse never to risk his heart. And in his cowardice, he'd hurt Isabella. He'd pushed her away not to protect Ashbourne, but to protect himself from the terrifying vulnerability of loving her more than anything else in his carefully ordered world. He'd nearly killed the best part of himself trying to stay safe. "No more." "Isabella," Adrian said, his voice cutting through the ballroom chatter. She turned, her eyes widening as she saw him approaching. "Adrian, what are you?" Thomas began. "Be quiet, Thomas. I'm talking to Isabella." Adrian stopped in front of her, aware that half the ballroom had gone silent, watching this drama unfold. He didn't care. "I need to say something, and you need to hear it." "I have nothing to say to you," Isabella said, her voice cold, but he could see the pain beneath. "Then just listen, please." When she didn't walk away, Adrian continued, his voice raw with emotion he no longer tried to hide. 3 weeks ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I told myself I was choosing duty over you, that I was being noble by pushing you away to preserve Ashbourne's welfare. But I was lying. I know. No, you don't know. Not all of it. Adrian took a breath, and then said the words he'd never said to anyone. "I pushed you away because loving you terrified me. Because for the first time in 7 years, I cared about something more than duty. You made me feel alive, Isabella, and I didn't know how to live with that. I didn't know how to reconcile being the duke who sacrifices everything with being the man who wanted to choose his own happiness. So I fell back on what I knew. Noble suffering, martyrdom, cold duty. I told myself I was protecting Ashbourne, but I was really protecting myself from the risk of loving you completely and losing you anyway." Isabella's eyes shone with tears, but she said nothing. "I was wrong," Adrian continued, his voice breaking. "Not just about the legal situation, though there were a dozen other ways I could have handled that without sacrificing you. I was wrong about everything, about duty requiring sacrifice, about love being a weakness, about happiness being a luxury I couldn't afford. The truth is, loving you doesn't make me weaker. Pushing you away did. Closing my heart did. Choosing to be cold instead of vulnerable, that was the true weakness." "Adrian," Thomas started to speak, but Adrian cut him off. "No, Thomas, let me finish. Isabella, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I hurt you abominably. I took your trust, your love, your faith in me, and I destroyed it because I was too much of a coward to choose you over my own fear. But I'm here now to tell you the truth, even if you never forgive me. I love you, not because it's practical or suitable, not because you'd make an excellent duchess, though you would. I love you because you're brave enough to feel, to care, to risk your heart even knowing it might be broken. I love you because you saw through my coldness to the man I'd buried beneath duty and obligation. You saw me, Isabella, the real me, and instead of finding me wanting, you loved me anyway. That was the most precious gift anyone has ever given me, and I threw it away. I'm so sorry, so desperately sorry. The ballroom was utterly silent now. Everyone is watching. Adrian dropped to one knee, right there in the middle of Lady Pemberton's ballroom, pride and propriety abandoned. I can't offer you grand gestures or poetry. I can't promise I won't sometimes struggle with choosing feeling over control, but I can promise this: I will never push you away again. I will fight for you, for us, for the life we could have together. I will choose you, Isabella, every single day, over duty, over estate, over everything. You are not a luxury I can't afford. You're the only thing that matters, so I'm asking you, begging you to give me another chance. Not because I deserve it, but because I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anything. Marry me, not next month or next year, tomorrow. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I've finally learned the difference between noble sacrifice and cowardice. Let me show you that I can be the man you saw in me, the man who chooses love over fear. For a long, terrible moment, Isabella just stared at him. Then Thomas spoke quietly. Isabella, I meant what I said. I'll marry you. I'll care for you. But, he looked at his brother, and there was both exasperation and love in his expression. He loves you more. He loves you terribly. And despite being an absolute idiot, he's finally brave enough to admit it. I'll step aside. I should have stepped aside from the beginning. Isabella ignored Thomas completely. Her eyes were fixed on Adrian, tears streaming down her face. You hurt me, she said, her voice shaking. I know. You made me believe you'd changed, then proved you hadn't. I had changed. Then I got scared and reverted to the man I'd been. But I'm done being scared, Isabella. I'm done hiding behind duty. I love you. That's all I know. That's all that matters. If I forgive you, Isabella said slowly, if I take you back, I need you to understand something. I won't be the perfect, accommodating duchess who never challenges you or questions your decisions. I will argue with you about politics and estate management. I will push you to be better, to feel more, to actually live instead of merely existing. I will demand all of you, Adrian, not just the Duke, but the man. Can you give me that? Yes, Adrian said without hesitation. God, yes. I don't want a perfect, accommodating wife. I want you, the real you, challenging, brilliant, impossible you. Then stand up, Isabella said softly. You look ridiculous kneeling on Lady Pemberton's ballroom floor. Adrian stood, hope and fear warring in his chest. Isabella stepped closer, until only inches separated them. I love you, she said. I've loved you from that morning in the garden when you finally let me see the real you. I love the man who builds schools for tenants and debates agricultural reform with genuine passion. I love the man who is learning, slowly, painfully, to choose vulnerability over control. That man I will marry. But Adrian, if you push me away again, if you choose martyrdom over trust, I will leave, and I won't come back. I can't survive being abandoned again. Never, Adrian vowed, pulling her into his arms right there in front of everyone. Never again, Isabella. I swear it. He kissed her, and the ballroom erupted in applause and shocked whispers, and probably scandal that would fuel gossip for months. Adrian didn't care. He had Isabella back. He had chosen love over fear, and for the first time in 7 years, the Duke of Ashbourne felt truly, completely alive. This brings us back to where we began. 3 weeks later, the church, the wedding, but not the wedding you're expecting, because after that night at Lady Pemberton's ball, complications arose. Isabella's mother, Lady Westfield, was deeply traditional and horrified by the broken engagement, the public spectacle, the fact that Isabella had been courted by 2 brothers. Society will never accept this marriage, Lady Westfield declared. The scandal is too great. Isabella, you must see the reason. Accept Thomas instead. His courtship was first. It's more proper, less controversial. Isabella refused. I love Adrian. I'm marrying Adrian. But Lady Westfield was relentless, And eventually, she played her trump card. She threatened to cut Isabella off completely if she married Adrian. "You'll have no dowry, no family support, nothing," Lady Westfield said coldly. "Think of what you're sacrificing." Isabella thought of Adrian sacrificing her for Ashbourne's welfare, and something hardened her. "Fine, I'll have nothing but Adrian. That's enough." Lady Westfield changed tactics. She went to Adrian with tears and pleading. "Please, Your Grace, I beg you, for Isabella's sake. The scandal will destroy her reputation. She'll be forever marked as the woman who played two brothers against each other. But if she married Thomas, the original courtship, the proper one, society would forgive everything. It would be romantic, a return to the intended course. I'm not asking you to give her up entirely. Just let Thomas marry her first. Then, in a few years, if something should happen—" "No," Adrian's voice was absolute steel. "But Your Grace, her reputation will be protected because she'll be a duchess. My duchess, not Thomas's, mine." But Lady Westfield was clever. She went to Thomas next. And Thomas, kind-hearted Thomas, thought perhaps his mother had a point. Perhaps marrying Isabella himself, giving her the legitimacy of a proper courtship and engagement, would protect her from scandal. He could make her happy. He cared for her deeply. And maybe, just maybe, giving her up had been a mistake. So Thomas proposed. Again, privately, in the Westfield drawing room, with Lady Westfield beaming nearby. "Marry me," Thomas said. "Not because you love me, I know you love Adrian, but because it's what society expects, because it will protect you from gossip, because—" He paused, then continued honestly, "because part of me still hopes that in time you might learn to love me instead." Isabella looked at this good, kind man who was offering her an escape from scandal and controversy. She looked at her mother, whose approval she'd always sought. She looked at the path of least resistance, and she thought of Adrian, finally brave enough to choose love over duty. "No," Isabella said firmly. "No, Thomas, I'm marrying Adrian. In 3 weeks, at Ashbourne Manor, with or without my mother's blessing, with or without society's approval. I'm done choosing safety over love." But Lady Westfield, stubborn to the end, refused to attend the wedding. She publicly declared her disapproval, which meant half of society followed suit. The guest list dwindled. Friends made excuses. Only the brave or the loyal agreed to come. Adrian didn't care. "We'll marry in an empty church if we must. As long as you're there, nothing else matters." The day of the wedding arrived. The church at Ashbourne Village was half empty, society's disapproval evident in the vacant pews. But Isabella was there, radiant in ivory silk, walking down the aisle toward Adrian with absolute certainty in her eyes. The ceremony began. Adrian spoke his vows with his whole heart, holding nothing back. Isabella responded in kind, her voice clear and strong. And then, "If any person can show just cause why these two may not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace." The pause stretched, and then the church doors burst open. Thomas strode down the aisle, his face pale but determined. "Stop," he said. "I have something to say." Adrian's heart plummeted. Not now. Not when they were so close. "Your Grace," Thomas said, addressing Adrian formally. "Lady Isabella, forgive me, but I must speak." "Thomas, what are you doing?" Adrian asked, his voice low and dangerous. Thomas looked at his brother, at Isabella, at the assembled guests. "I'm doing what I should have done weeks ago. I'm telling the truth." He took a breath, then continued loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I proposed to Lady Isabella last week. I asked her to marry me instead of my brother, claiming it would protect her from scandal. But I was lying. Not about wanting to protect her, that was true, but about my motives." "Thomas," Isabella started to speak, but Thomas held up her hand. "Please, let me finish. I told myself I was being noble, that I was helping. But the truth is, I wanted you for myself, Isabella. I've been in love with you since the moment we met, and watching you choose Adrian has been," his voice cracked, "has been the hardest thing I've ever endured. So when the opportunity arose to win you back, I took it. I convinced myself I was protecting you, but I was really just being selfish. I'm sorry. To both of you. You belong together. Everyone can see it. The way you light up around each other, the way you challenge and balance each other, that's real. That's love. And I was wrong to try to interfere with it." He turned to the assembled guests. Lady Isabella is not playing two brothers against each other. She is not calculating or manipulative. She is brave. She chose the harder path, the one that requires more courage, more honesty, more risk. She chose real love over easy propriety. And she chose my brother not because he's a duke, but because he's Adrian. Flawed, stubborn, occasionally idiotic Adrian, who loves her so completely he finally learned to be vulnerable. If anyone in this church thinks less of Lady Isabella for that choice, then you're not worth her consideration anyway. Thomas met Adrian's eyes. She's yours, brother. She always was. Don't screw it up this time. Then he turned and walked back down the aisle and out of the church, leaving stunned silence in his wake. Adrian looked at Isabella. She was crying, smiling, radiating joy. Well, the vicar said, clearing his throat. Shall we continue? Please, Adrian said, never taking his eyes off Isabella. Before someone else objects. They completed the ceremony without further interruption. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian kissed Isabella with all the passion and promise he'd once been too afraid to show. The church, sparse as it was, erupted in applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, Isabella leaned close to whisper, "Your brother is a good man." "The best," Adrian agreed, "but I'm keeping you anyway." Isabella laughed, and the sound was pure sunshine. 6 months later, Ashbourne Manor glowed in the golden light of late afternoon. In the library, Adrian and Isabella sat together going over estate accounts, their heads bent close as they debated the merits of investing in new drainage systems. "You're being overly cautious," Isabella argued, pointing to the numbers. "The initial expense is significant, but the long-term return is theoretical," Adrian countered. "We should test the system on one farm first before committing the entire budget. That will take 2 years. Better 2 years than bankruptcy if the system fails." They argued back and forth for another 20 minutes, neither willing to concede, both thoroughly enjoying themselves. Finally, Isabella laughed and threw up her hands. "Fine, we'll test it on one farm, but when it works brilliantly, I expect a full apology. And when it proves more expensive than projected, I expect you to admit I was right." "Never," Isabella said cheerfully, kissing him. "I'm your wife, not your yes woman. Get used to being wrong." "I married a tyrant," Adrian said, but he was smiling. "How did I not see this coming? You were too busy being cold and brooding to notice my dictatorial tendencies." They'd fallen into this pattern easily, working together on estate matters, debating every decision, challenging each other constantly. It was exactly what Isabella had promised. She was not a perfect, accommodating duchess. She was loud, opinionated, and absolutely refused to defer to Adrian simply because he was the duke. He'd never been happier. "Oh, I nearly forgot," Isabella said, pulling a letter from her pocket. "This came from Thomas this morning. He's in Scotland, visiting the Mackenzie estates to study their tenant farming systems." "Is he well?" Adrian asked, accepting the letter. "He sounds well, happy even. He's met someone, Miss Catherine Mackenzie, the estate owner's daughter. He says she's brilliant and manages the estate herself and has opinions about everything." Adrian smiled. "She sounds perfect for him." "She does." Isabella settled against Adrian's side, her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me over, well, everything? The easier path?" "Never." Adrian's arm came around her, holding her close. "Not once. Isabella, before you, I was existing but not living. I had duty and responsibility and a very well-organized estate, but I had no joy, no warmth. No one challenged me to be better than merely competent. You awakened something in me that I'd buried so deeply I'd forgotten it existed. The ability to feel, to risk, to love someone more than anything else. That's not a sacrifice. That's salvation. Even when I'm arguing with you about drainage systems, especially then," he kissed the top of her head, "though I am right about the drainage systems, you are absolutely not right." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Adrian's secretary entered with an apologetic expression. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but there's someone here to see you. She's quite insistent." "Lady Westfield." Isabella stiffened. She hadn't spoken to her mother since the wedding. Lady Westfield had maintained her position that the marriage was scandalous and improper, and Isabella had learned to live without her mother's approval. "Shall I send her away?" Adrian asked quietly, his hand tightening on Isabella's. Isabella took a breath, then shook her head. "No, let her in." Lady Westfield entered a moment later, looking older than Isabella remembered, more uncertain. She stood in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly before her. "Mama," Isabella said carefully, "this is unexpected." "I know I have no right to be here," Lady Westfield said, her voice trembling. "Not after how I behaved. Not after I missed your wedding and tried to force you to marry Thomas and—" She broke off, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was wrong, so terribly wrong. I thought I was protecting you from scandal, but I was really just trying to control you, to force you into the safe, proper choice, instead of trusting you to know your own heart. And in doing so, I nearly destroyed your happiness." Isabella stood, moving toward her mother. "Mama, please let me finish. I've spent 6 months regretting my actions, 6 months hearing from every quarter how happy you are, how much the Duke adores you, how well you manage Ashbourne together. Lady Castlereagh told me just last week that she's never seen a more devoted couple, and I missed it all. I missed your wedding, your first months of marriage, the joy I should have celebrated, because I was stubborn and proud and foolish." Lady Westfield looked at Adrian. "Your Grace, I owe you an apology as well. I judged you harshly, convinced that your change of heart was proof of instability rather than growth. I was wrong. You love my daughter. Truly, deeply love her. I can see it in how you look at her, how you stand beside her even now when I am the intruder. You chose her when it cost you dearly, and you have proved every day since that she was worth every sacrifice. I am sorry for doubting that, for trying to come between you. You were protecting your daughter," Adrian said quietly. "I cannot fault you for that. I hurt Isabella badly. You had every reason to doubt my constancy. But she forgave you," Lady Westfield said, "because she saw your heart. And I was too blind with propriety and reputation to see what mattered. Love, trust, partnership, those are what make a marriage, not society's approval." She turned back to Isabella. "Can you forgive me, darling? Might we begin again? I don't expect to repair everything immediately, but perhaps in time." Isabella crossed the remaining distance and embraced her mother. "Of course, Mamma. Of course I forgive you. You were doing what you thought was right. We all were." They held each other, both crying now, and Adrian quietly stepped out to give them privacy. He found Thomas's letter still on the desk and read it properly. Adrian, his brother, had written, "Scotland is remarkable. The estate management here would fascinate Isabella. You must bring her to visit. But more than that, I've met someone who challenges me and makes me laugh, and has no patience for charm without substance. Miss Catherine Mackenzie is brilliant and impossible, and I think I might be falling in love with her. Properly, this time. Not the shadow of love I felt for Isabella that was real, but it was also partly about wanting what you had, wanting to be the hero of the story. This is different. This is about Catherine herself, not about proving anything or being anyone's second choice. I'm happy, Adrian, truly happy, and I owe that to you, in a strange way. Watching you fight for Isabella, watching you finally choose vulnerability over control, it taught me something. That real love requires courage. That being second choice doesn't mean being less worthy of love. It just means finding the right person whose first choice you are. Catherine is my first choice, and I am hers. It's terrifying and wonderful, and I finally understand what you and Isabella have. I'm grateful, brother, for everything. Even the messy, painful parts. They led me here, to this moment, to this woman, who might just be my future if I'm brave enough to fight for her the way you fought for Isabella. With love and gratitude, Thomas." Adrian smiled, folding the letter carefully. His brother had found his own happiness, his own love, his own courage to choose, feeling over safety. They had all grown, all learned, all become braver than they'd believed possible. "Your Grace?" Adrian turned to find Isabella in the doorway, her mother beside her. "Mama has agreed to stay for dinner," Isabella said, her eyes bright with happiness. "Is that acceptable?" "Of course," Adrian said warmly, crossing to them. "You're always welcome here, Lady Westfield. This is Isabella's home as much as mine. Her family is always welcome." Lady Westfield smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Your Grace. You're very kind." "Adrian," he corrected gently. "Please, call me Adrian. We're family now." That evening, as they dined together, Adrian, Isabella, Lady Westfield, and the Dowager Duchess, who had arrived unexpectedly and immediately began planning a proper wedding celebration ball for the couple. Adrian looked around the table and marveled at how thoroughly his life had transformed. A year ago, he had been cold, controlled, and utterly alone despite being surrounded by staff and tenants and responsibilities. Now he was warm, vulnerable, and surrounded by family and love and partnership. It took courage to change. It had required him to face his deepest fears that needing someone made him weak, that loving someone gave them power to destroy him, that choosing happiness over duty made him selfish. All of those fears had been lies. Loving Isabella had made him stronger. Opening his heart had given him more power to do good, not less. And choosing happiness, choosing to actually live instead of merely existing in service to duty, had made him a better duke, a better brother, a better man. After dinner, as guests departed and the house settled into evening quiet, Adrian and Isabella retired to their chambers. "Happy?" Adrian asked, pulling Isabella into his arms. "Deliriously," she replied, tilting her face up for a kiss. "Though I still think you're wrong about the drainage systems." Adrian laughed, the sound coming easily now where once it had been forced. "You're impossible. You love it." "I do." He kissed her deeply, then pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "I love you. All of you. The brilliant parts and the stubborn parts, and the parts that refuse to let me hide behind duty when I should be choosing us. You saved me, Isabella, from a life of cold nobility and noble suffering. You taught me that vulnerability is strength, that love is worth every risk, and that real courage isn't in sacrificing what you want, it's in fighting for it. And you taught me," Isabella said softly, "that people can change. Those walls can come down. That the coldest heart can learn to feel again if someone is brave enough to keep knocking. We saved each other, Adrian. That's what love is, two people choosing each other every single day over safety and comfort and fear." They stood together in the candlelight, this duke who had finally learned to live and the woman who had taught him how. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead. The estate slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new debates, new opportunities for Isabella to prove Adrian wrong about farm management and for Adrian to argue right back. But tonight, they simply held each other, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them here. From cold nobility to warm partnership, from duty-bound sacrifice to chosen love, from existing to truly, completely, joyfully living.